Welcome to this editor special episode of the HemOncPulse. I'm your host, Nicole Tucker, Managing Editor of Blood Cancers Today. Joining me today is Dr. Nicholas Richardson, the Vice President of Clinical Development at Precision for Medicine, who previously served as the FDA Deputy Director for the Division of Hematologic Malignancies 2. Dr. Richardson and I will take a deep dive into the FDA's draft guidance titled Minimal Residual Disease and Complete Response in Multiple Myeloma Uses Endpoints to Support Accelerated Approval. Thank you for joining me today on the HemOncPulse, Dr. Richardson. Let's get right into this conversation.
Every story has a pulse. Let's check the vital signs of what's happening right now.
First, can you start with kind of reminding us how traditional response endpoints such as stringent complete response have been used historically in myeloma clinical trials, and what were some of the limitations with those endpoints?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you mentioned, a response rate has been widely used to support drug approvals in oncology, and then specifically in multiple myeloma over the last 10 years, we've really seen just an explosion of novel approvals in this space, such that the survival of patients with newly diagnosed multiple myeloma has improved over the last decade, which is great. And with all these options, again, it's a good problem to have for providers and for patients. And so when we think about response rate and its use for drug approvals in oncology and multiple myeloma, we're actually really fortunate to have response rate, essentially meaning that tumors don't go away or cancers don't go away by themselves. And so it's an endpoint that really is a measure of a drug's activity. And so we can use that to really support its activity and its efficacy and really translate that into a patient's outcome. And so with all the advances in multiple myeloma, one of the issues that has come up is that these therapies have become so active that now we're seeing response rates, 80% and higher, 90% and higher. And so when you think about a new drug, that's a really high bar to show that you are better than available therapy, which is really what is required for an accelerated approval. You need to show that you provide a meaningful therapeutic benefit in the context of available therapy. And so that's provided a challenge in the current field of multiple myeloma. And that's really where MRD has emerged as this novel endpoint that's going to be able to be used as a metric of response. It's a deeper level of response at a molecular level, such that we're actually going to be able to continue all the wonderful advances that we've seen in multiple myeloma by using this novel endpoint that was supported by the ODAC committee in 2024 and now has been more formally established with the release of the FDA guidance on MRD and multiple myeloma just recently.
Amazing, thank you. So with the FDA's new draft guidance in mind, can you kind of clarify how MRD negativity and complete response are defined for the purposes of regulatory decision making?
Yeah, so as mentioned, this FDA guidance was recently released, and it's just a continuum from the FDA team that did the analysis of MRD, in addition to the public-private partnerships that were presented at the 2024 ODAC with the I-Squared team and the team from University of Miami. And so when we think about MRD negative CR, one interesting part of the MRD story is the fact that the threshold for what is a representative clinically meaningful threshold of 10 to the minus 5 was actually incorporated into the International Myeloma Working Group criteria, the 2016 criteria. And I say that's an interesting part of the story because what that did is it afforded the inclusion of MRD at this standardized clinical threshold of 10 to the minus 5 in current and future multiple myeloma trials, such that we were able to generate this really robust data set to evaluate whether MRD and a drug's impact on MRD translate to longer-term outcomes for patients, such as progression-free survival and overall survival. And so based on that evaluation, really it was identified that MRD negative complete remission measured at 9 months or 12 months on an individual patient level show that they do have beneficial long-term outcomes if somebody can achieve MRD negative CR. The one thing it did show is it did not translate to an overall trial level surrogacy where we can say that if you have an impact on MRD, it will translate to an impact on progression-free survival and overall survival. Now, there was a correlation in patients with newly diagnosed multiple myeloma who were not eligible for transplant, and that was for progression-free survival. But we did not see that correlation at a trial level for the other settings, such as newly diagnosed multiple myeloma who are eligible for transplant and also for patients with relapse refractory multiple myeloma.
Amazing. Thank you for that background, Dr. Richardson.
Now, let's follow the flow. How does everything connect?
What are the expectations regarding timing and frequency of MRD assessments in a clinical trial as related to this guidance?
Yeah, so one thing about this guidance is that it actually focused on MRD. However, it was really placed in the context of existing regulatory frameworks and initiatives from the FDA's Oncology Center of Excellence. And so what I mean by that is there was a clear preference for randomized trials, even when sponsors are utilizing MRD as the endpoint of interest to support an initial accelerated approval. And when you have a randomized trial, it clearly articulated that there was a preference